that it is really, really, really easy to bite off more than you can chew, especially when it comes to certain subjects. But we can't begin until we have the official, digital recording device. But now we have it, so we can begin. As I was saying, I knew pretty much the chunks that I was going to bite off and chew on throughout this series of lessons. I didn't realize when I got to this particular point, and I should have. I spent many, many painful weeks studying this in college, but the late Middle Ages, and I have identified these as anywhere between 1300 and 1500, are just so complicated, and you can get yourself tied up in knots if you are not a professional historian, if this is not really one of your huge loves where you can follow names and political alliances and situations such as that. This is just a very, very difficult chunk of time, and it's long. 200 years. We could break this down into one semester and study this for 45 to 50 hours. Unfortunately, we don't have the time, nor the energy, nor the interest to do that. So my little introductory paragraph here: the 2 centuries between 1300 and 1500 saw a multitude of developments that would have lasting implications for the church. There really wasn't all that much new. Now, depending on your definition of new and depending on your definition of much, you might choose to argue with me there. But for instance, the church councils had been going on for centuries. The process, the work of the monks, the monasteries had been going on for decades, if not centuries. The papal, the growth and the power of the papacy had been going on for centuries. So all of these things continued and grew and multiplied, but in terms of something that was crystalline new, there really wasn't all that much. But all of these things coming together were already in place for what I refer to as several smaller squalls of church dissension that would, beginning round about the late 1400s, early 1500s, develop into the full-blown upheaval of the Reformation. So I have identified these 5 points, and we'll work through them. There's one, number 4, that I'm going to spend a little bit more time reading because it's easier to read what I found than it was for me to try to distill it. Number 1, and kind of a preface statement here: nothing in history is ever one straight line. And what we're looking at here broadly is a brief history of the church. Well, that would be fine if all we had to do was look at the history of the church. But you can't do that because the church is interconnected to, initially, the Roman Empire, and then later on, multi-nations, and the increasing, point number 1, the increasing role of nationalism. But all of that has to do with various economies, wars. Even during this period that we're looking at this morning, you have the event of the Black Plague, which wiped out millions. And so, even if you just look at, say, for instance, World War II, what happened on June the 6th, 1944? Is that it? Is that the only thing that happened on June the 6th, 1944? No. There were battles, there were this is going on, there were that's going on, there were everything. So we think, oh, June the 6th, 1944, D-Day. Well, yeah, that was one event of one portion of June the 6th. So, Brent.
One thing, I'm so glad you mentioned the bubonic plague. One of the things that created for our context that you're building is the first time that there was how can I say, an independent now middle class.
Okay.
The first time ever that could choose to whom they would, work with, because a lot of them were wiped out. A lot of the aristocracy wasn't. Some were, but and now suddenly they're having a hard time finding people to do their bidding. And so there was a resilient and, if you will, upstart middle class rebellious forming during this very same time.
Yeah, and something that I could probably include on this lesson, although I'm going to hold off on a fuller discussion until next week, because it really leads into the beginnings of the German Reformation. But this whole idea of the Renaissance and the rise of a middle class. Prior to the Renaissance and this basic time frame, you were either a have or you were have not. You were a slave owner or you were a slave. Now, they didn't use those terms, but you were either aristocracy or you were a serf. All right? And so to say, oh, we're just going to look at church history, it's a misnomer. You just can't. Just as a person, just as a very, very, very recent example, try to write a history of the year 2020, 2019, 2018, 2019, 2020, politically, all right? All you're going to do is you're just going to focus on the politics of 2020. Try to do that without mentioning COVID. You can't. COVID was a medical problem, but look at how it had such a massive impact politically. So just you think, well, so what? Bubonic plague, Black Plague, not a big deal. Well, yeah, it had political implications, it had economic implications, it had religious implications. Point number one, there is a decrease in centralized power, and I'm talking empire-wide, but there was also at the same time as a single emperor lost authority and lost control and lost power, there were individual nations that rose. So for instance, in the year 300, 325, whenever it was, that Constantine became a Christian, and this whole many aspects of church history began with Constantine, but you had one emperor, and then you had the church bishops, all right? The Roman Catholic Church would say there was a pope. Yeah, we're not ready to go there yet. But as the pope increased in power, you still had one emperor, and eventually you had one pope, the Bishop of Rome. All right? They could duke it out, and many, many, many emperors and many, 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 many popes had little fisticuffs and fights, and the emperor would try to get rid of the pope, and the pope would try to get rid of the emperor. But basically, it was mano a mano. All right? One against one. When the centralized political authorities started decreasing and there was no emperor, then you started having individual kings. For instance, you had the King of France. You had the Kaiser of Germany. Now, the Kaiser considered himself to be the emperor, but I'm not enough of a historian to go down that rabbit hole. But you had secular authorities in Italy. You had secular authorities in England. You had secular authorities in Spain. Now, they might have considered themselves to be vassals of another emperor or another king, but they were still over their little fiefdom, their kingdom. They were the secular. And so the one singular bishop of Rome, who by now, for centuries, had been referred to as the Pope, he now had to get all these other ducks in a row. He didn't just have to fight one. He had to try to control numerous secular leaders, and with varying degrees of effectiveness. Secondly, and this, we could spend weeks on this, Pope Boniface VIII and King Philip of France, otherwise known as Philip the Fair, really got into it. And this is one of the huge fights between the Pope and a king that would have lasting, profound implications for the history of the church. It was during this time that France was fighting one of the many wars against England, and the king was running out of money, and the church was flush with money. And so, like any good self-respecting secular leader, he decided he was going to levy taxes against the church, and in particular, the clergy. Well, what are they going to do? Oh, yeah, we're just going to hand over all of our money to the King of France? No. They appealed to Pope Boniface VIII, and they said, this guy's trying to tax us into oblivion. Pope Boniface responded with a couple of what are referred to as bulls, and I had to find out what a bull was. But a bull comes from the Latin word bulla, meaning a lead seal that was affixed to a papal decree, and so they got the name bull. Couple of them, the major one of which, and it's funny, any time a pope issues an official declaration, it's known as, it's archived according to the first two words of that declaration. And so this papal bull has been archived, has been known forever since as unum sanctum. And the third word is ecclesiam, unum sanctum ecclesiam, one holy church. Latin is like many languages. You don't have to start with the subject. You can start with the verb. You can start with the subject. You can start with anything else. So in English, it doesn't begin one holy church, but in Latin, it's one holy church. And basically, the concluding sentence or paragraph to this papal bull is, every living thing is under the Pope's authority. That means you, Philip the Fair, that means every king, every human being, God has given authority over all to his church. I am the head of the church, therefore you cannot tax what I control. That did not set very well with King Philip. That did not set well with the French people. That did not set well with many other peoples. And so this dust up, which, like I said, had been occurring this I didn't put a date on this, 12, 12 something, 1270 something. This had been going on for centuries. The popes had been disagreeing, arguing, excommunicating, fighting with secular leaders. But what happened here was that the Pope lost, at least in terms of secular authority. He could no longer force the King of France to bow the knee to him. And although if you were living at this particular time, you would just say, oh, the Pope and the King are having another fight, it would, throughout the next few years, have a huge, looking back on it, kind of be one of those watershed events that you can look back on and say it was a whole lot bigger at the time than perhaps maybe we even thought about. Well, beginning in 1309, and partially because of this fight between Boniface and Philip, the papacy moved from Rome to Avignon, France. In 1309, the Archbishop of Bordeaux was selected Pope. He selected his name, his papal name, as Clement V. And one source I read indicated that it was under the pressure of King Philip, and I'm not sure if this was Philip the Fair or another Philip, but under the pressure of the king, he said, I don't want you going, you're the Archbishop of Bordeaux, you're a good Frenchman, I don't want you to go to Rome and act like those Italians over there. I want you to move the papacy to France. Whether it was in acquiescence to the king or whether it was his particular choice, Clement V chose Avignon, France, as the seat of his papal power. And that then created all kinds of not only religious but political turmoil, because now we have Italy and France politically fighting each other, not just with this religious question. All right, the fourth event kind of that took place, Squall, if you want to call it that, is referred to as the Western Schism. Now, East and West had already separated 1054 over a whole bunch of different issues, but the Eastern Church, Eastern Orthodox Church, has kind of faded from view. When we talk about church history, unfortunately, the East kind of has its own categories, and you have to study Eastern church history or Orthodox church history as opposed to Western church history. And so this is referred to as the Western Schism. And it created then the incredible situation where there were two and eventually three popes who all claimed to follow in the divine succession, the throne of Peter. So you have three popes, not just one. So this is what I want to read. Number one, because the source that I found really does summarize it very nicely. Number two, because if I tried to summarize it, I would get it so confused and so torn up that y'all wouldn't understand it anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and read these couple of pages. The Western Schism arose in 1378 when the papal election of Urban VI was disputed by French cardinals, who elected a rival pope, Clement VII. Political alliances and national rivalries sustained the division. The roots of the Western Schism trace back to the Avignon papacy from 1309 to 1377. From 1309, under pressure from Philip IV of France, the papacy resided in Avignon rather than Rome. This period, initiated by Pope Clement V, was marked by accusations of corruption and strong French influence. Many in Christendom criticized the papacy's reliance on French monarchs and its financial mismanagement. In 1377, Pope Gregory XI, now this is where I get so confused because all these different names and all these different numbers. Pope Gregory XI returned in Rome in January 1377, intending to restore the papal seat to its original city. However, his death in March of 1378 sparked immediate unrest. Tensions were high in Rome as local factions demanded the election of a Roman or Italian pope to ensure the papacy remained in the city. We don't want those Frenchies taking our papacy back over to Avignon. Bartolomeo Pregano, Archbishop of Bari, was elected Pope Urban VI on April the 8th, 1378. His election was reportedly influenced by intimidation from Roman crowds who sought to ensure the election of a pope favorable to their demands. Urban VI's harsh demeanor and reformist zeal alienated many of the cardinals who had supported him. In September 1378, so he was elected in April, in September, 13 dissenting cardinals declared Urban's election invalid, citing coercion among the conclave. They elected Robert of Geneva as Clement VII, making the start of a schism. Everybody following along? I hope so, because I'm lost. Clement VII reestablished his papal court in Avignon. So we've got a pope in Rome, and we've got a pope in Avignon, France, with the support of France. With the support of France, Scotland, Castile, Aragon, and several other European powers. His papacy symbolized the growing political and national rivalries that fueled the schism. Urban VI retained control of Rome and garnered support from England, Hungary, Poland, and most of the Holy Roman Empire. The division of allegiances was largely determined by political alliances rather than theological differences. The rivalry between the Roman and Avignon papacies deepened, leading to excommunications and military conflicts. Cities and nations were split in their loyalties, sometimes resulting in violence and social unrest. Various efforts to reconcile the two papal factions failed. Theologians began to advocate for a general council to address the crisis, but such a council could only be convened by a pope, a dilemma given the contested legitimacy of both claimants. Now, what pope in his right mind is going to call a council if he's going to lose his papacy? So neither one of them is going to do it. In 1409, the Council of Pisa was convened by cardinals from both sides in an attempt to end the schism. The council declared both Pope Gregory XII, this is sometime later, Pope Gregory XII, who was the Roman Pope, and Pope Benedict XIII from Avignon, illegitimate. So this council in Pisa says, you're both out. Neither one of you are legitimate. And they elected Alexander V as a new pope. However, this decision only worsened the situation as it introduced a third claimant. So we've got a pope in Rome, a pope in Avignon, and a pope in Pisa. After Alexander V's death in 1410, his successor, John the 23rd, continued the Pisan line. His leadership was characterized by limited support and mounting calls for decisive resolution to the schism. The Council of Constance from 1414 to 1418 was convened by John the 23rd. All right, he's the Avignon Pope, and endorsed by the Roman Pope Gregory the 12th. So the Roman Pope and the Avignon Pope say, okay, let's put our differences, and let's solve this problem. The council aimed to restore unity within the church. Gregory the 12th resigned. He said, okay, I will resign my papacy as an effort to facilitate the council's success. Benedict the 13th, the Avignon Pope, refused to resign. So he was excommunicated. And John the 23rd, who was the Pisan Pope, was deposed by the council, ending that line. So now we don't have any popes. One resigned, one was excommunicated, and one was deposed. In 1417, the council elected Martin V as the sole pope, effectively ending the schism. His election restored unity of the Catholic Church and reestablished the papacy in Rome. The schism had a lasting impact on the Catholic Church's authority. The spectacle of competing popes weakened the Church's spiritual credibility and exposed its susceptibility to political manipulation. The crisis bolstered the conciliarist movement, which held that a general council held supreme authority over the Pope. Now, this is going to be important as we move forward. Although the movement was later suppressed, it reflected growing demands for reform within the Church. The schism eroded the Church's unity and discipline, contributing to the conditions that eventually led to the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. So we'll stop there. So you can see how this introduction of Pope fighting King led then to a whole series of actions and reactions and counter-reactions and further counter-reactions, which ultimately led then to this idea of having three popes, three vicars of the Lord's Church. And what has happened since that time is the victors always get to write history. And so throughout the next few years, the Roman Catholic Church, centered in Rome, decided that everybody or all of these popes in Avignon, during the schism, any pope in Avignon or Pisa were simply anti-popes, and they were not popes at all. So that's how you have the solution. The historical solution to the problem was, well, they really weren't popes. Oh my! This was so mind blowing to me when I was 19, 20 years listening to the professor trying to go to all these different classes and keep all this stuff straight. And not only do you have to keep all of the Pope's names and numbers straight, you have to keep all the king's names and their numbers straight. Because it's not just Philip or Edward or Elizabeth. There's always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 25, 30, 412. I just can't keep any of that stuff straight. So we will go through point number 5 and then open the floor for any questions or comments. This, all of these things taking place, going back all the way to Boniface, what was that, Boniface the Eighth and Philip the Fair, all of these things allowed for a growing discontent with the power of the papacy. Now, it's not that these people were trying to overthrow the Pope. They were just trying to say, listen, you've gone too far. We need to rein in the power and the authority of the Pope. During the conflict between Boniface and Philip, the attacks were based basically on the Pope's authority or lack thereof. And one of the significant arguments was, hey, let's go back to Moses and Aaron. Moses took care of all the legal stuff. Aaron took care of all the spiritual stuff. So why can't we do that today? And we'll let the Pope take care of the church, and we'll let the king take care of the country, and yeast is yeast and west is west, and never the main shall tweet, if you want to understand that joke. But let's keep the authorities, let's keep the powers separate. That's the way God wanted it, right? You can agree with that, you can disagree with that, or you can whatever, but that was one of the chief arguments, was the whole relationship of Moses and Aaron. During the pontificate of John the 22nd, 1316 to 1334, the subject was slightly different, and that was really, what spiritual authority does the Pope have? Is the Pope under Scripture, or is Scripture under the Pope? Now, today, I believe, on one hand, they would say the Pope is under Scripture, but the Pope gets to interpret Scripture. So I don't think they've really answered the question very, very clearly, one way or the other. But this was a growing question. Can the Pope just unilaterally declare something that is either contrary to Scripture, or if not contrary to Scripture, certainly is a new look on Scripture? Or is the Pope bound by the written words of Scripture? The last real challenge to papal authority centered on this idea of, does the Pope have power over a general council, or can the general council exercise authority over the Pope? And I think today the answer would be the Pope has authority over the council. The last major council that was called was Vatican II, way back, I think, in the 60s. Now, my last little bullet point there is important. That all of these challenges, all of these questions, all of these letters, all of these tracts that were being written and being disseminated were always made by faithful churchmen. They were faithful to the church. They would declare allegiance to the Pope. They were not trying to overthrow the Pope, although the Pope might certainly disagree that they were being faithful. But their point was, we want to reform the church. We want the church to be holy, one holy universal church. And so things are going to change in a rather drastic way when we cross the line into the 1500s and we start looking at the reforms of Martin Luther, who, once again, was a faithful Augustinian. He was one of the holiest of holy, all right? He wanted to make the church right. He wanted to reform the church. But the result of what Martin Luther eventually was able to accomplish was a separation from the church. And so Martin Luther was able to accomplish something that these other reformers could not, or actually probably were not interested in doing. All right, any other thoughts or questions, comments about this really convoluted, very difficult time in the church history?
Well, and you did a great job on pointing out the personal side between men, whether secular or spiritual. It all came down throughout that time to money and power. And where is that going to reside, and who has especially the power to act? And it's amazing to me what the conniptions that at that time, the Roman Church went through to be sure they had enough money to outspend any secular king. It's truly amazing.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about that, how the Crusades kind of created this money-raising machine of the indulgences. And that just continued even after the Crusades. The indulgences were a major money-raising. I tried to, as I was putting all this together and trying to absorb all of this and trying to coalesce this into a simple 45-minute lesson, ask the question, where has the Restoration movement followed in these bumbles and fumbles? Where have we managed to avoid some of the bumbles and fumbles? Everybody's going to have an opinion about that. We have always been a movement focused on personalities. I was soundly thrashed for saying that once upon a time, but I'm going to stick by it. We have coalesced around very powerful, energetic, dynamic leaders. Alexander Campbell, Martin W. Stone, David Lipscomb, Tolbert Fanning. All of these individuals who combined their energetic and charismatic leadership very often with money. Alexander Campbell was a very wealthy man, far more so than Martin W. Stone. David Lipscomb was not a poor man. And so if you had money, you could buy or you could create your own journal. The Christian Baptist, the Millennial Harbinger, the Christian Standard, Gospel Advocate. All of these journals were created by individuals who had the money to buy a printing press, buy the paper, do all of this printing. That further built up your authority, your voice within the Restoration movement. Now that's not to say that we've followed like sheep, but it's just an indication that money speaks and power craves power. And so many of the fights, squabbles, disagreements, however you want to identify them, within the Lord's church have been fueled not so much by theological disagreements, although that might have been the introductory source of the disagreement. They have been fueled by political and interpersonal disagreements. One side would follow David Lipscomb, one side would follow the fellow that edited the Firm Foundation for many years. Ferguson? That doesn't sound right.
No.
Can't remember the name of the fellow that it started the Firm Foundation, which was basically a response to David Lipscomb and the Gospel Advocate. So anyway, sometimes our higher angels have stubbed their toe, and sometimes our higher angels have risen above. And we're humans. We're humans. We're all humans. And so that is going to be a major problem for all of us. We're never going to get away from being human. I'm sorry about that. Okay, next week, something that I think will be of far greater interest. We're going to begin delving into the history of not only the Roman Catholic Church, but the Lutheran Church and all of the Reformed churches under John Calvin. And we're going to start to see where those issues affect our situation today, where we're at today. So much of this stuff that we've been looking at is so opaque, and it really doesn't have a lasting impression on us, or a lasting, not impression, but implication for us. But beginning next week, we're going to see, I think, far more interesting stuff. Okay, let's take a break as we get ready for our worship service this morning.
Paul?
Yep.
The Firm Foundation